All right, hi folks. This is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Update Brazil. Itzlo is not with us in this program, neither is Alan, but I'm here with Brian Kennedy, and he is very qualified with his academic background. And Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be with you.
Now, you are a political scientist, is that right?
I am, but I'm always reluctant to ever assign anything that sounds like you're an expert. I think a lot of our side does better when we talk in terms of common sense. So I never try to invoke anything other than common sense in my talks with people.
Well, that's very wise. I have a quote to begin. We're going to talk about the Trump transition and the Trump revolution.
Right.
And I have a quote from Mao Zedong about revolutions and what to do and what not to do. And he's a guy that actually did a revolution. And here's what he says. This is from Mao's essay, Analysis of the Classes in Chinese Society, and thinking about applying it to the Trump revolution. Mao writes, "Who are our enemies and who are our friends? This question is one of primary importance in the revolution. All past revolutionary struggles in China achieved very little, basically because the revolutionaries were unable to unite their real friends to attack their real enemies. A revolutionary party is the guide of the masses, and no revolution ever succeeds when the revolutionary party leads it astray." So how do you see that with Trump? Who are the enemies and friends of the Trump revolution?
Well, I mean, it's a great, interesting quote. I think we'd have to start, though, in a communist revolution, there really is no legitimacy inherent in the people themselves. It really is more in the hands of the communist elite, who know better than the people, I think, in their way of thinking, how to govern society. The people are uneducated, and so the communist elite must guide them. Now, in China, to achieve that requires force and totalitarianism. With the Trump revolution, you have a completely different system, right? You have the framework of a constitutional republic, and you have people that are supposed to be legitimate in our society. And the entire basis of Trump's argument is he was on the side of the common man. He was on the side of the people. And so his revolution is merely to reestablish the fact that the people are sovereign in the United States. And so, in a way, the American Revolution was being vindicated rather than it being a Trump revolution, even though Trump, of course, is a revolutionary type figure. Trump was trying to say, in arguing about illegal immigration, in terms of defending America, in terms of making better deals, that he was on the side of the common man, that the elites had become illegitimate, that they were on the side of the elites and not the people, and that he, Donald Trump, was now on the side of the people and was going to fight for the people. And so that's the great genius of Trump, that he was trying to make the people legitimate again. The moral legitimacy of the regime was going to be in the hands of the American people. That's why he won, in my judgment.
So is the elite in the United States, the ruling elite in Washington, is it kind of that this elite has been against the people?
I don't know that they've been so much against the people as for themselves, right? They don't really care about the people. They care about their own ruling status. And when we think of the elites, what really do we mean by the elite? We mean the university. We mean the government bureaucracies. We mean those educated people who have established themselves as either part of the government in a narrow sense of literally working for the government, or those people who are part of anything connected to where their own wealth is tied to the government, as in the university. The universities are using government money to perpetuate a system that is defending the government. Modern progressivism is built on the university and the simple belief that you cannot govern yourself, you, the American people. You need experts. You need people educated by the modern university who have PhDs in economics to run your life. That you cannot run your life. We have to run your life. And so we're going to send people to the university, and then they're going to work for the government. And that system is doing very well for those people who are working for the government, working for the university, and are part of the modern information-based economy. And, you know, there's a lot of freedom in America, and a lot of these people are, you know, that I've just described are very well intentioned. But what they don't seem to care about is the good of the American people. And this is what Trump was trying to get at when he was arguing that the elites have let you down and I'm on your side. Right? And so, I mean, that in a way is vindicating the idea that all men are created equal, and that government shouldn't be there for a special class of person. That government should be there to defend our equal rights. And so I think in that regard, the Trump election, you know, we'll find out. I mean, he still has to govern, of course, but as an election, it was trying to vindicate the notion that this is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Even if it took a billionaire, you know, reality TV star, real estate developer to make that argument.
It's interesting. There's more than 3 million people that work for the federal government. And I understand in a transition, typically there's only 7,000 of them end up leaving government and getting replaced by people that are perhaps more aligned with the new president. And of course, as a political scientist, you've studied probably this business of the permanent government. They look at the elected government and say, well, we'll do what we want anyway, or we'll wait him out, or we'll just bureaucratically forestall him. Is this going to be a major problem for the new administration?
Well, it could be if they don't do something about it. I mean, some of my colleagues, John Marini, R.J. Pistrito, and others have written about modern progressivism. Charles Kessler at the Claremont Review of Books, Claremont Institute. These are all Claremont scholars. And they've written about modern progressivism and the fact that you have this enormous bureaucracy that runs Washington, and that bureaucracy continues these progressive policies. And that one failure of modern conservatism is that it hasn't figured out how to dismantle the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy keeps on carrying out progressive policies, and the president and his administration tend not to be very effective at dismantling that bureaucracy. Now, my hope for Donald Trump is that he will figure that out. I think in many ways has figured that out. And so will appoint secretaries of education, agriculture, commerce, state to dismantle those bureaucracies. And when you dismantle the bureaucracy, then you could put in place policies that are meant to be constitutional and carry out those things that are meant to be carried out by the government. I mean, Ronald Reagan was asked to get rid of the Department of Education, or he had made the argument he was going to get rid of the Department of Education. But when he got there, he never got rid of the Department of Education because he didn't want to spend the political capital to do it, right? Now, I think Donald Trump believes he can spend the political capital, that he has a lot of political capital, and that he will dismantle those bureaucracies that are not doing, you know, their proper job. You know, and I think that one of the big challenges is actually getting a handle on what it is government ought to do. Not what it is doing, but what it ought to do. And then making sure the government can conform to that. And I think that'll be the great test of the Trump administration. George Bush is the better example. Didn't dismantle anything, did he? Right? He was there as more of a caretaker of modern, the modern bureaucratic state. He didn't see himself as a guy who was going to return to constitutional government. And so constitutionalism and conservatism, to the extent that it merely protects big bureaucratic government, is basically indifferent than modern liberalism. It's indistinguishable from modern liberalism in that regard. And so if Trump actually changes that, that will be an amazing achievement.
Yeah, that will be an amazing change. And Ronald Reagan wasn't able to get rid of, like you said, the Education Department or the EPA. And now maybe I didn't hear right, but I remember during the campaign that Donald Trump had promised to get rid of the Education Department. Is that your recollection?
I think he wants to reform it, and I imagine he will reform it. Look, if the Department of Education was merely offering some guidelines here and there for what Americans ought to study, or judging the performance of this or that, educational system out there, or educational, program, that would be one thing. I mean, in a broad, general way. But education is properly done by the states. And so if it's properly done by the states, what does the federal government have to do other than, encourage education? But actually to be funding it, organizing it, setting out guidelines, that's not the job of the federal government. My colleague, Bill Bennett, was Secretary of Education. And, Bill really thought up the idea of a Common Core. But when he thought of Common Core, what he meant was a common standard of, the canon of Western civilization that American students ought to be learning, right? Read Shakespeare, understand mathematics, understand physics, understand, those things that an educated human being ought to understand. But he didn't think the federal government should be involved in it, right? And, when Bill became became Secretary of Education, he asked Ronald Reagan, okay, well, you promised to get rid of this. Should we get rid of it? Because just say the word and I'll dismantle this thing. And Reagan, who was trying to get a lot of things done through Congress, didn't want to spend the political capital getting rid of the Department of Education, because he wanted to get a lot of things done fighting the Soviets during the Cold War. And so Reagan was picking and choosing his battles. I think Reagan, on the natural, would have liked to have gotten rid of the Department of Education because he didn't think it was constitutional as a practical matter. Or as a practical matter, not really was it not constitutional, but it wasn't doing good things. Will Trump understand it that way? I imagine he will. And does he want to spend the political capital to get rid of it? That'll be another thing. Let's hope that he does. And in so doing, teach people, what is the proper role of government? Should you be caring about this on your state level and your city level and your local level? Or should we care about it in Washington? Reagan had that famous quote back in 1968. I'm just paraphrasing it, but he said, the real test is, are we going to be governed by a small bureaucratic elite in a far off place? Well, the small bureaucratic elite is not so small anymore. It's a big bureaucratic elite, and they're running our lives. And, Reagan wasn't able to dismantle that, and we'll see if Trump can.
That will be interesting to see. Let's talk for a minute about defense policy. And there's been this big kind of, I don't know what to call it, a propaganda campaign trying to link Trump with Russia, trying to say that Hillary Clinton said it in the last debate, that Trump is a Russian puppet. And of course, we have a problem with the relationship with Russia. Russia's in Syria now. Russia has annexed Crimea from Ukraine. There's a conflict in eastern Ukraine. And there's this military buildup in Europe, which has NATO alarmed. So how do you see this developing? Is Trump a Russian puppet, or is there something funny about this whole way of talking?
Oh, I think it's just an amazing piece of theater, isn't it? And just sort of a big lie. by Obama. I mean, let's first look at the obvious facts. Does Russia have an interest in Donald Trump being president? No. What has Trump promised to do? He's promised to rebuild our nuclear arsenal, modernize it, make it the best nuclear arsenal in the world. Today, it's not that. Today, the Russians and the Chinese have a very advanced nuclear arsenal. Trump is pledging to make ours as good, if not better, than theirs. Trump has promised to build a national missile defense, right? He has promised to do that. Obama and Hillary have consistently been against it. Trump's going to build one. Trump has said he's going to rebuild the American military, making sure we have a Navy that can command the high seas, an Air Force that can project power, and an Army that is second to none. Trump has promised to have an intelligence and cyber capability that will be second to none. None of that is in the Russian strategic interest. None of that. And so just on a purely strategic level, it would be crazy to think the Russians have an interest in Donald Trump getting elected. On an economic basis, where does the Russian wealth come from? It comes from oil, gas, and mineral sales to the West. Now, Donald Trump has promised to have, quote, complete energy independence. Complete energy independence, where we're going to produce all of our oil, gas, etc. here in the United States. He's going to expand fracking. He's going to expand, natural gas production. I mean, we're going to do it all here. If you're the Russians, would you want Donald Trump to do that? Or would you want the United States to be dependent on world energy markets and the higher prices that would command? What will an increase in American supply do? It will lower energy prices. Now, Hillary Clinton, she was against, she is happy for us to buy, energy from the world energy markets. She's against fracking. She's against any sensible, energy policy on purely environmentalist grounds, which themselves are bogus. So from the strategic point of view, the Russians had no interest in Donald Trump. From an economic point of view, they had no interest in Donald Trump. And so the idea that either he's a Russian puppet or that they in any way helped him seems to me ludicrous and merely designed to undercut the legitimacy of Trump, by Obama, Hillary in the debates, but Obama now. It's purely designed to hurt him. Now, that having been said, the Russians are a problem. Just because they didn't want Trump, they are a problem. I think Trump sees that, by the way. Trump understands how dangerous they are. He doesn't know Vladimir Putin. To the extent that he can see Putin, he sees all the trouble going on in the world. Trump criticizes the Iran deal. Well, who's behind Iran but the Russians? The Russians are helping them with their nuclear arsenal. The Russians may well have transferred technology certainly transferred technology to them in years past, may have sold them a nuclear warhead. The lethality of the Iranian military is due substantially to either the Russians or the Chinese. Trump knows that. Trump's gotten briefing on those things. He has no illusions about what kind of guy Vladimir Putin is. Do we have an interest in good relations? Absolutely. Absolutely, we have an interest in good relations. But the way you get good relations is by being strong again. Trump knows that. If you rebuild the American military, if you have energy independence, I guarantee you relations will be much better. Just talking to the Russians is not going to get it done. You have to do the things to where the Russians know you're serious. If you do those things, and I fully believe Donald Trump will, the Russians will take him seriously and they'll respect him. They didn't respect Barack Obama, even though he was a man of the international socialist movement.
There's a kind of strange thing with this, because the Russians are pretending publicly to like Donald Trump coming in. And the left here, Obama and Hillary, they're pretending that Russia is a big threat and they would be going into conflict with Russia. But in reality, they're the ones that would be doing the policies that Russia wants. So there seems to be a coordinated deception game, coordinated between the Russian government and the left in the United States. Am I misreading this?
No, not at all. I think you're exactly right. When we say coordinated, though, it sounds conspiratorial. And I would say this is more operates at the level of ideology and at the level of just world politics. Look, Obama is a man of the international socialist movement. I mean, what did he do just this week? He went after Israel with his Secretary of State, John Kerry. So he tried to delegitimize Israel the same way he tried to delegitimize Trump. Now, why does he go after Israel? Because he's a man of the international socialist movement who believes that Israel is fundamentally illegitimate. Fundamentally illegitimate, and the noble and just cause is the pan-Islamic cause, right? As you know, as expressed by the Palestinians, as expressed by all the Islamic radicals. And it's the noble and just cause because the pan-Islamic movement is designed to destroy the West. And so to the extent that the international socialist movement believes in the destruction of the West, Obama is right there with them. The Russians are right there with them because the Russians have always subscribed to the notion that the West is the enemy of their own world, if not domination, their own world, their own ability to influence world events. And so does Russia have an interest in strengthening the West or weakening the West? Weakening the West. Obama has sought in these last 8 years to weaken the West. Now, when the Russians and the Obama administration go back and forth, it's a little bit of a kabuki dance, right? It's a bit of a fraud. It's a bit of a game just to, the Russians, really the Obama administration thinks the Russians are a problem, right? The American left, including Obama, has not thought that the Russians have done a single nefarious thing against the United States for 50 years. Now, all of a sudden, Russia is turning on, the United States. That's ludicrous. And I think Obama, what has Obama done to the Russians? Nothing. What should Obama have done when the Russians invaded Crimea? Should we have had full-scale thermonuclear war? Of course not. But did he do anything to improve our position strategically in the world? No. There was a whole bunch of talk, but all that talk just meant we were feckless and inadequate to deal with our own defense or the defense of the West. When the Russians invade Crimea, Obama should have announced that he was going to build a full-scale national missile defense that would protect the United States and our allies abroad. You want to hurt the Russians? That hurts the Russians, right? That signals to the Russians that they are not going to be the bullies of the world. Does Obama do that? No. No, it's all talk. Look, Obama is a fraud, and our side has just never called him on it. Donald Trump, I don't think Donald Trump has to even call him on it, but he's going to do those things that will put us in a better strategic position vis-a-vis the Russians. That's what the Russians respect. And all the belligerence of, Obama and the American left right now, including, I'll throw into the American left John McCain and Lindsey Graham. All their belligerence, what is that going to do? Right? Lead us to another Cold War. A Cold War that the Cold War did offer a certain moral clarity, but, a Cold War just for the sake of being belligerent to one another, that seems rather silly. We have a lot of things to get right, and we're going to get them right under a Trump administration, I firmly believe.
Well, let me ask you this. Is this deception by the part of Obama, where he postures against Russia, is this merely kind of political cover to enable him to shortchange our defense?
Well, I think it, in part, is merely meant to delegitimize Donald Trump. I don't think he means it at all. I think he's signaling to all of his. I don't think he's doing it for anyone's benefit but the American left. Because if it is a fraud, and look, I don't think there's any serious evidence that the Russians hacked into our system. And if they did, by the way, hack into our system, they didn't do a very good job of it. I mean, who would think that a few WikiLeaks, emails from, John Podesta or Hillary Clinton are going to bring down the Trump administration or bring down a Trump candidacy? The Russians didn't do the kind of things that would have actually been effective. And so if Obama thinks, I think Obama genuinely believes he can go after the Russians, because if he makes this look like Donald Trump is somehow illegitimate, then it'll signal to his colleagues on the American left that he's willing to play hardball. We haven't seen the last of Obama, I think, or his wife. I think he's going to be around for a while in some form. And by taking these parting shots at Israel and, with the Russian sort of dance here, Donald Trump, I think he's signaling to the American left that he'll play ball for many years to come, and that he's a serious player, and he is not going to go quietly into that good night. Right? I think it's purely a sign that he has a career in American politics long beyond his presidency and really wants to keep on fighting. And we'll use this Russian gambit to delegitimize Trump. That's all that is. Look, he has a few more weeks to go here, and during those weeks, he's not going to be able to, change world affairs. God forbid, unless he, it would be crazy to think he's going to start a war in the next 3 weeks. He could try, but I think that would be just a sign of complete desperation. I know there's a lot of friends we have who think, oh my God, these last 3 weeks are going to be the most dangerous of our lives. And, I, for one, want January 20th to come none too soon, but let's certainly hope that the country is stable enough to survive 3 weeks of Barack Obama. We survived, 7 years and 11 months.
Well, Obama has been a lame duck really for a while because of the Republican control of Congress. He really has been sort of roped off and constricted in what he can do.
Absolutely. And of course, that's been his own doing, right? His own political liberalism just went too far, and there was a backlash. The American people didn't think Obamacare was working, and they didn't have a sense, as a practical matter, that he was on their side. Hence, you get Republican majorities in Congress, and you get the election of Donald Trump, because the American people just at a basic level didn't see, they saw Obama, I think, as a representation of the elites. And, to the extent that the elites were not improving the economy and creating government programs that were not any good, they turned to someone who was going to fix that. And that was Trump. So yeah, he has been a lame duck. Yeah, that's right.
That's an astonishing result in the election. I think a lot of people were caught off guard, and they were surprised at the way the election turned out. Were you surprised at the outcome?
No, and look, I'm a bit of an optimist. I was hoping Donald Trump was going to win. Just as a private citizen, I was hoping Trump was going to win. But I had gone in the summer to Cleveland, and I was actually a surrogate at the Republican National Convention, a national security surrogate for Trump. So I spent a week in Cleveland talking to a bunch of state delegations of Republicans, really good, decent, everyday American people who happen to be delegates for both Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and others. And there was an amazing amount of enthusiasm just by these everyday people for what Trump stood for. And they knew he wasn't perfect. They knew he wasn't an altar boy. but they thought he wants to fix illegal immigration. He sees a problem with the Muslims, and he wants to make better trade deals. They saw him for who he was, right? They didn't, try to psychoanalyze the guy. They thought, here are some good policies. Let's get behind him. And as sort of everyday people, they were enthusiastic. And, between that experience and the enthusiasm I saw, and just anecdotally, you saw neighbors who, were not political people, but who were registering to vote so they could go vote for Trump. Now, I live in California, which is a crazy place, and, Trump lost big here. But just anecdotally, when you hear people registering to vote, I thought, there's something going on. And people are enthused because, you never heard about that for John McCain or Mitt Romney, but you heard it for Trump. And, in that sense, I was not surprised at all and was quite encouraged. I think this is one of the best things politically that's happened in my lifetime. One of my colleagues, John Marini, who teaches political science at the University of Nevada at Reno, really, he was one of the great writers, about Trump. He argued that there was something more fundamental going on in this election than even with Reagan. That with Reagan, he was arguing, it was the Cold War, things were serious, but Reagan was arguing he had better policies than Jimmy Carter, which of course he did. But it was still a choice between, one president with policies and another presidential candidate who had better policies. With Trump, there was something different going on. Trump was making an argument that I'm going to fix illegal immigration. There's something fundamental about illegal immigration. He was saying, I'm going to defend your citizenship. I'm going to unite you as one people. Whereas Hillary was saying, look, if you're black, if you're Mexican, if you're gay, if you're lesbian, right? She divided everything up and was trying to appeal to each individual group discreetly and was trying to build enough of them to win an election. What was Trump doing? He was saying, I don't care about your color. I don't care about whether you're Irish, Mexican, German. I don't care. Are you American? Are you here legally? Are you a citizen? I'm going to defend your citizenship against these elites in Washington who believe in illegal immigration, who essentially have open borders. I'm going to defend your citizenship because it is dangerous what is going on. These illegal immigrants are doing bad things in this country. That's a fundamental kind of election then. That choice is not about just the policy. That choice is really about, can I defend what it means to be an American citizen? That was a very powerful thing that Donald Trump was doing in that regard. And so, I think this election in that sense is more important than maybe any we've had, other than Reagan.
Going to John Kerry's speech and this idea of nationalism, because what you're saying is that Trump is a nationalist and America is a nation, and that America has a right to its borders. And of course, there was something in this speech that Kerry gave that sort of said that Americans must be, and Israelis must be, for everybody but themselves. I mean, isn't that kind of part of what was said there, that we all have to be internationalists, not nationalists?
Exactly. I mean, again, it's part of the, you hate to just characterize things as being, ideological, but to the extent that Kerry believes in the international movement, a global elite, right? And this international movement of, nations, you have to subjugate your nation to that. They don't believe in the American nation. They don't believe in defending us. Now, they wouldn't quite put it that way, but their policies don't put us first. Their policy, they try to look at America only as part of an international system. And so, trade deals shouldn't benefit Americans. Trade deals should benefit everybody. Now, an American businessman is always going to try to benefit everybody, right? But if you have trade deals that disadvantage Americans, that doesn't make any sense. If you have foreign policies that disadvantage Americans, that makes no sense. And so, yeah, no, Kerry and Obama and Clinton and much of the Democratic Party today doesn't see the American interest. They see us merely as part of, a global system where we need to be put in our place. And I think Americans just reacted to that. When Trump said America first, an American first foreign policy, that's maybe not the most artful way of putting it, given its historical context. But for the average America, they hear America first. Yeah, you're darn right. Darn right, we should be first. What is a nation other than defending our borders, defending our interest, and making sure that the social compact we have with each other as citizens is defended? I mean, on purely theoretical grounds, who is our social compact with? Is it with each other or with everybody in the whole world? Our social compact is with each other, just as Americans. And with Obama and Kerry, I think they genuinely believe their social compact is with the whole world, hence their belief in open borders, or effectively open borders, right? And it was Trump who was fighting that.
It's so interesting. I had the sense about the Kerry speech that it was kind of, they were, with Trump coming in and the election campaign, this speech really contrasts the kind of government we've had with the kind of government that we're going to have here. And that I think the public had a negative reaction to Kerry's speech, and I think Israel did too. Are they kind of sinking themselves by sticking to their guns and kind of exposing who they really are and what they've really believed all along?
Well, I mean, they've been put in their place, as it were, by the election itself. And again, I think Kerry and Obama are playing a long game here. That, yeah, it looked kind of foolish, as the administration is ending, to have these kind of speeches and make these kind of pronouncements. It looked kind of foolish, but in another way, it showed a seriousness on their part, that they wanted to get their side charged up. What they were doing was not to demoralize us, even though I do think it was about delegitimizing Trump. They were trying to send a signal to their side that they should be in the fight and stay in the fight, and that this is an ideological battle. And they wanted to get their side engaged in that ideological battle, however corrupt it is. I mean, you and I would think this is an ideological, belief that is crazy. And it is crazy, but they don't think that. And they wanted to engage. People did react negatively, as well they should. But I think that there are a lot of hardcore leftists who thought, yeah, exactly. Let's stay in this fight and let's not go quietly.
So there's a kind of confidence in their side prevailing in the end if they just make their argument and stick to their guns.
Yes, it could be I think it's entirely misplaced, right? Entirely misplaced, but that doesn't mean they don't have that confidence. I mean, it would take a blind confidence to say the crazy things they say. What sane person would say that essentially we should abandon Israel and that, the Russians helped Donald Trump? You really do have to be living in a pseudo reality, right? Now, once you deceive yourself that you're right about these things, you're going to believe a whole host of things, right? Obama thinks he could beat Trump. I think Trump would have crushed Barack Obama in any kind of election, just because Obama, after 8 years of just insanity, policies that didn't work, we saw what's going on with Obamacare, but we also see what's going on in the Middle East and elsewhere. After 8 years of that, Donald Trump merely had to point that out. I think Mitt Romney could have beat him if he'd have gone after, if Mitt Romney would have gone after Barack Obama the way he did Donald Trump, you know, Mitt Romney could have beaten Barack Obama. The American people just need to be rallied to some sensible, you know, explanation of how the world actually runs. That was Trump. I think, you know, Obama and Kerry, you know, they're con men of sorts. They're pretty good con men. And, you know, a con man operates with what? Confidence. It's all about confidence, right? And so it's a confidence game. And Obama was good at it, but like most confidence games, they eventually, you know, they eventually lose or they eventually end.
Now, you mentioned the Republican establishment and Mitt Romney, and that's interesting. Is there a sea change? Is there a real change coming to the Republican establishment? Or is the Republican establishment going to work to undermine Trump during his administration?
Probably both. I mean, right? I mean, any establishment is, you know, it's going to have people who are, you know, wed to a certain way of doing business. They're certainly going to try to, you know, protect their interests. You know, they're going to protect, you know, how they've done business over the years. But I do think, you know, like many politicians, they're not courageous. They're not courageous. And so they're going to follow the prevailing winds. And if the prevailing winds are being, you know, mixing metaphors to say, you know, winds are being, you know, guided. But if Donald Trump can push things in the right direction, I think most of these politicians will fall in line. Yeah, they'll be fighting here and there. You see it with McCain and Lindsey Graham already. But ultimately, let's hope they see a better understanding of how the world ought to run. And you know, the Republican Party will either accommodate themselves to this more sensible, you know, common sense conservatism that Trump espouses, or the Republican Party will disintegrate. Now, I think it's, you know, I think it's very unlikely it'll disintegrate. I think it's more likely it'll simply fall in line. But we'll see. I mean, it'll all depend on how artful Trump is in pushing his agenda. And I think you'll see more and more people, you know, look, what does Trump want to do? He wants to fix the illegal immigration and improve the American economy, rebuild the national defense. I mean, that's not really that radical. I mean, it's pure common sense. I mean, you need to fix the things that are broken. Now, if Republicans don't want to do that, what have they been Republicans all these years for? Is there a single thing Donald Trump has been advocating that the Republican Party would disagree with intellectually? Maybe on the margins about trade, but I think even most of what Trump has said about, you know, trade and tariffs and, you know, bad trade deals, I think most of that's the, you know, sort of his opening gambit in trying to make sure that we have genuine free markets in which to sell our goods, which we don't have today.
That's a very good point. Let's talk about free trade and China for a moment. And I was amazed during the campaign how Trump's position was misrepresented, because as I was listening to Trump, I was hearing him saying fair trade. And what he was against was the fact that a lot of our trades, it wasn't really free trade. It was a trade agreements that were killing our economy. And I would have to agree with Donald Trump. I mean, the practices of Mexico and China are unfair trade practices, practices that aren't really free trade, because China and Mexico aren't playing according to the free trade rules. They're exploiting their agreements with the U.S. to create a system of trade in which they're exploiting, they're lowering their currency below its real value in order to flood our markets with goods that they really can't compete with us in terms of quality. Maybe they can produce them with cheaper labor, but I mean, we all know the shoddy quality of Chinese goods, and how a lot of Chinese products aren't even worth buying because you're just wasting your money because the products are so bad. And in the days when we can remember that America produced those goods, well, I'll just give you an example. I'm a fountain pen user. And I couldn't find a fountain pen for years that worked worth a darn because they were all made in China. And what good is a $30, $40 fountain pen if it doesn't work after a few days, when it used to be made in the USA, or it used to be made in Germany or France, and it worked?
Right.
And it was funny when the dollar crashed, or when the economy crashed in 2008. I found that they started manufacturing some fountain pens in the US again. I bought one because it was made in the USA, and it was just like the old-fashioned kind I used to like to buy, and it worked like a dream. And that was an example. I will not buy certain products because they're made in China. It doesn't matter how cheap they are. And I think that if Donald Trump can fix this trade problem and we can get manufacturing in certain areas here in the US again, it's going to be good for everybody. So, so what do you say? Do you think this is?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I mean, anybody can make good products and anybody can make bad products. And in a free market, good products succeed, right? That's just the way it works. Now, if you could buy that, if you could buy a fountain pen instead of $40 for $1, well, you might buy one every day, right? And then just throw it away when it breaks. People want to buy quality. You can buy quality American-made products if you get government off the backs of American industry. And if you lower energy costs, right, and you have a genuine free market, many of these jobs and many of these products will be produced here in the United States. There will be some things that will always be more affordable to produce in China or India or Mexico or somewhere else. We know that, at one time people said of the Japanese, the Japanese goods weren't as good as American goods. Probably that wasn't quite true. The Japanese are capable of producing, excellent things. The Chinese can very often produce excellent things. Now, is it uniformly excellent? No, but they can produce many things. What we have in China and Mexico, however, are not free countries. And because they're not free countries, their own people don't consume, consumer goods, products the way we do. And so the great failing is not only do we have bad trade deals, but we have deals with countries where, under no circumstances are they going to buy American goods. They don't even buy Chinese goods. I mean, that's the interesting thing. In China, they can't get people to buy Chinese goods, let alone American goods, because those people live in a world where you have a communist dictatorship. Even if you have some local freedoms, you have a communist dictatorship, and people are uncertain about their future. And so they're not going to consume like Americans. And until the point that China is free and playing by the rules of, the world, it's going to remain a sort of second-class country when it comes to its economic power. They do a lot right, but the Chinese do a lot wrong. Look, the Chinese aren't even playing fair on their, as you suggested, their finances. They manipulate their currency. They don't, they buy U.S. Treasury bonds, for instance. Now, why do they buy U.S. Treasury bonds? They don't do that as a favor to the United States. They do it because it's good business for them. An investment in a U.S. Treasury bond is good because we're going to pay it back. And that's why the Chinese buy U.S. Treasury bonds. And because they buy all those U.S. Treasury bonds, we somehow seem to be beholden to them as if they're doing us a favor, when in fact we're doing them a favor. And the Chinese, right now, the Chinese have not repaid the sovereign debt that it owes the United States. I mean, the Chinese in reality, and I think Donald Trump's going to point this out, the Chinese owe billions and billions of dollars to America on treasury bonds owned by American citizens that the Chinese sold in the last century. And the Chinese have just believed that they don't have to repay those kind of things because they're the Chinese and they're not going to play by the same standards. Well, it's been the case for 50 years that they've gotten away with it. Under Donald Trump, they're not going to get away with it. They're going to have to behave like everybody else does. They're going to have to pay their debts. They're going to have to, Their currency is going to have some kind of standard, and their trade deals are going to have to be lived up to. And, up to now, they've gotten away with it. But with Trump, I think he's going to set that right.
Are the Chinese going to challenge Trump in the South China Sea? Is there going to be heightened tensions between the U.S. and China because of Trump's policies?
I imagine so. And look, the Chinese are ambitious. And, the leadership of China right now, President Xi, is a man who believes that China really is the superpower that ought to dominate the world. They're part of that, that Red Guard generation that really does think that, their fathers took a step back and their fathers, were humble and kept their heads down while China grew in the world. But that this generation of Chinese, they're going to show the world who's boss. And so their army is large and powerful. They're building a navy to match those ambitions. They have nuclear weapons that are becoming ever more advanced. They're building missile defenses that will seek to negate the US arsenal. And so they see themselves as a superpower to be reckoned with that will eventually become the world power. And they're taking every step they can to make that a reality. Now, will there be conflict with Trump? Only if Trump doesn't do what he says he's going to do. If he rebuilds the American military, builds a missile defense, modernizes our nuclear forces, then we'll get along very well with the Chinese. But if we remain weak, then the Chinese will not respect us. You started the interview with Chairman Mao, right? The Chinese leadership has always thought, that we were paper tigers, that we had this big military, we had these nuclear weapons, but we'd never used them, that it was all talk. Well, no one wants to use nuclear weapons. No one wants to engage in a war. We're a commercial republic. We want to produce things, sell them in a free, in America and around the world. And we have this military in order to keep us strong and defended. And so if the Chinese see strength, as I say, I think we'll get along great. If we remain a paper tiger that is all talk and doesn't do the kind of things to rebuild our military, then the Chinese will take advantage. They've been taking advantage, and I think with Trump, they'll see a new world. Because we rebuild doesn't mean it's more provocative. I think you'll find it unusually stabilizing for China to see someone serious. And I think the Russians will see it the same way.
It's very interesting going into this administration. You had the markets, you had people saying the markets would not have confidence in Trump, but then right after the election, the markets started to react positively to Trump's election. And going to America's allies in Europe and Asia, do you see them reacting positively to the prospect of Trump presidency?
I would certainly think so. I mean, our main allies are going to have confidence that with a strong American military, you'll have a renewed American vigor in the world, that speak softly and carry a big stick. I think you'll see that again. And that gives confidence to our allies. And, our allies have seen that we've been a bit confused over the last 20 years. We won the Cold War, but we didn't take advantage of any of those so-called victories. I'm one of the handful of people, I think you might be the other, who thinks that, the Soviet Union reorganized and that the Cold War wasn't a war to be won. That, the Soviet Union ends and Russia reorganizes. We didn't disarm Russia. We didn't disarm communist China. That world politics go on. And, the Cold War ended, and I think we're still recovering, as it were, from that victory. And we didn't enjoy the fruits of that victory. And because of that silliness, we did everything in our power to build down the American military and put ourselves in a strategic position to where there was chaos. And that chaos has led us, it did lead us to, you know, Barack Obama. And now you have a correction with Donald Trump. And I think, you know, the world will see that there's a strong American hand again, and that with that strength, you're going to have, you know, a certain stability and confidence. And I think not only will our strategic competitors think that, our enemies think that, but our friends will all think that too, and that they have to be emboldened by that. So
Yeah,
I'm encouraged in that regard.
it is encouraging. I mean, when you think that Hillary Clinton might have won the election, and you think of what her policies would have been, I mean, the trouble that we would be in 4 years would be greatly amplified over what we have now. Isn't that your view?
Oh my God! I mean, is there a single policy she would have pursued that would have been different than Barack Obama? No. I mean, whether it was military policy or economic policy, it would have been the continued decline of the United States. Yeah, that, I mean, it would have been awful. And I think the American people got that.
Now, we're in the last bit here, and I'm just wondering about your thoughts on the Syria situation. We've got a civil war in Syria, and of course, Hillary Clinton said that she believed in imposing a no-fly zone at one point, which one of our generals had said that would mean war with the Russian Federation. What do you think Trump's going to do about the Syria thing and ISIS and Russia being in the Middle East? How do you think that's going to play out, or is it completely up in the air at this point?
Well, he has said he wants to work with the Russians to deal with ISIS. And so I imagine, you know, working with the Russians, he could have some kind of stability there. I mean, part of our problem in the Middle East is we keep having this illusion that these countries ought to be all democratic. We have a great democratic ally in Israel. They believe in human freedom. They've been fighting and defending that for many years. With these other countries over there, these Islamic countries, it's very difficult to see how they're going to have democratic institutions when they don't fundamentally believe in freedom. And so, you know, you see Egypt trying to develop into a democracy, but in so doing, they're trying to fix, you know, the Islamic ideology that's been dominating their country, you know, in the last, you know, 6-7 years with the Muslim Brotherhood. In Libya, you see turmoil caused by Obama. In Syria, you see turmoil caused by Obama. I think we have to, you know, break away from this illusion that our job is to go there and democratize all these folks. Stability will be a good thing. Making sure our ally Israel is defended would be a good thing. But if Bashar al-Assad in Syria can provide stability, that will be better than chaos. I mean, the problem with Syria is we've created chaos, and, you know, we might have to look and say, everybody's a bad guy, right? The people fighting Assad are bad guys. Assad's a bad guy. They're all bad guys. We don't have to pick one bad guy. If the bad guys want to kill each other, that may not be our problem. Let them kill each other. But if we the American people, are going to send our sons and daughters over there to fight and die, it better be for the good of the American people. And so, you know, part of the problem in Syria is they're all bad guys. And of course, there's children dying and there's innocents dying. That's true of every war. But, you know, now that Obama has created chaos, Trump's job to, you know, create more chaos, or to let the chaos sort itself out. Now, if we can sort it out with the Russians and not, you know, create more war, fine. But, you know, you may end up with stability at the hands of Bashar al-Assad as its leader. The same way, look, we had Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi had realized, Gaddafi was a bad guy, but he had become an American ally because he thought, hey, I don't want to be the next target of George Bush's, foreign policy. And so I'm going to get along with these Americans, even though we had been long enemies. Well, we don't think well of Bashar al-Assad, but if he can provide stability over there in Syria, that will be a good thing. Getting rid of Gaddafi has led to chaos. Getting rid of Assad, which I think was Obama's, goal, that led to chaos. Right now, Assad's still in power, but whatever can lead to stability over there and make sure that the American interest is defended, that's what matters the most. And it'll not be easy to sort out. But engaging in war with the Russians over this, that doesn't seem like a sensible outcome, right? Obama creates chaos, and we're going to have a world war. No, Trump will sort that out. And also, if we can check the ambitions of the Islamic, terrorists, whether it's Al Qaeda or ISIS, we need to defeat them ultimately. And maybe that's a subject of another show. But ultimately, you have to defeat the cause of Islam and its challenge against the West. Under Obama, he emboldened it, and that's what you see being played out. Ultimately, that war has to be won, and that will be, I think, the job really of the Trump administration, to defeat the cause of Islam as a tool against the West.
Yeah, very well said. Well, I want to thank you, Brian Kennedy, for joining us on Update Brazil, and hopefully you can come back with us again in the future. For those that enjoyed the broadcast, please push the button saying thumbs up that you like it. And we'll see you next week. Our guest is going to be Peter Pry. And Brian, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be on the show.
All right. All right, folks. Take care.